Faith can blind you to everything. Even when the woman you love is using God's house to destroy your life, I trusted her prayers more than my own eyes, and that mistake cost me everything I had left. Sometimes you don't get scammed for money. You get scammed for hope, and that's the one you never get back. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This confession was sent to us by a viewer who needed his story heard, no matter how painful. I met Roslin at Santo Niño Basilica in Cebu City during my 3rd month in the Philippines. I was 58, freshly divorced, and carrying $180,000 from selling my Portland house, money I thought would last me forever in paradise. She was kneeling in the front pew after Sunday Mass, still in her white organist dress, fingers moving silently over invisible piano keys while she prayed. Something about her devotion made me stay in my seat, long after everyone else had left. The way she held her rosary, the gentle way her lips moved in silent prayer, the complete peace on her face. It was everything I'd been searching for since my divorce destroyed my faith in love. When she finally opened her eyes and saw me watching, she didn't seem surprised or uncomfortable. She just smiled softly and said, "You look lost." I felt my chest tighten. "I am," I admitted. She stood up gracefully, smoothing down her dress. "God brought you here for a reason," she said with such certainty that I believed her completely. "I'm Roslin. I play the organ here." "Howard," I managed to say. "I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do next." She tilted her head, studying my face with genuine concern. "Would you like to pray with me? Sometimes God speaks clearer when 2 hearts ask together." We knelt side by side in that empty church, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone in the world. When we finished praying, she invited me to stay for the evening service. "Music helps heal broken souls," she said, "and yours looks very broken." I stayed, and when she played Amazing Grace on that old organ, I cried for the first time since my divorce. She pretended not to notice, but I caught her watching me with the kind of compassion I hadn't felt in years. Roslin courted me through scripture and song. Every date began with prayer. Every conversation ended with Bible verses. She played hymns on her phone while we ate at local restaurants, her voice harmonizing perfectly with the recordings. "Music is how I speak to God," she explained one evening as we walked along the waterfront, "and He speaks back through the notes. When I play, I can feel His presence guiding my fingers." I'd never met anyone who made faith sound so beautiful and real. She lived with her elderly mother in a small concrete house near the church, and every time I visited, the walls echoed with religious music. Roslin had crucifixes in every room, prayer candles burning constantly, and a schedule that revolved around Mass times. "Morning prayer at 6 a.m., she'd explain. "Then breakfast, then I practice organ until noon Mass. Afternoon is for visiting, sick church members, evening prayer at 6, night Mass if there's a special service." Her devotion was complete and genuine. When I asked if she ever got tired of such a structured life, she looked at me like I'd asked if she ever got tired of breathing. "God gave me this calling," she said simply. "How could I be tired of serving Him?" After 2 months of dating, I brought up marriage during one of our evening walks. She stopped walking and turned to face me. "Howard, marriage is sacred. It's not just about 2 people loving each other. It's about 2 souls joining to serve God together." She insisted we meet with Father Martinez first. "A union blessed by God cannot fail," she said, squeezing my hand. "But we must make sure this is His will, not just our desire." I felt like I'd found something pure in a world gone corrupt. Here was a woman who put God first, who understood that real love was about more than just attraction or companionship. I started attending daily Mass with her, learning the prayers, even considering converting to Catholicism. "You don't need to convert," she told me one night. "God sees your heart, but it would be beautiful if we could take communion together someday." Our wedding at Santo Niño was everything I'd dreamed of, but never had with my ex-wife. Roslin wore her grandmother's vintage gown, yellowed with age, but still elegant, and carried a bouquet of sampaguita flowers that filled the church with their sweet perfume. She sang Ave Maria during the ceremony, without a tremor in her voice, her clear soprano echoing off the stone walls like an angel's call. Father Martinez spoke about divine providence bringing us together, about how God sometimes uses broken hearts to create stronger love. Roslin cried genuine tears when we exchanged vows, not the careful tears of a bride worried about her makeup, but real emotion that made her voice shake as she promised to love and honor me. I, Roslin, take you, Howard, as my husband, to serve God together, to build his kingdom through our love, to be faithful until death do us part. When she slipped the ring on my finger, she whispered, God has answered my prayers. The reception was modest but perfect. Her church friends, her elderly mother who blessed us in Cebuano, and a few expat neighbors I'd befriended at the local coffee shop. No alcohol, just pure joy and sacred music. Roslin's friend Carmen sang traditional Filipino songs while children from the church played in the courtyard. This is how God intended weddings to be, Roslin said as we watched the celebration. Simple, joyful, focused on his blessing. That night in our hotel room at the Radisson Blu, she knelt beside the bed in her white nightgown and thanked God for blessing her with a husband who would help her serve him better. Thank you, Lord, for bringing Howard into my life. Help us be worthy of this gift. I knelt beside her, feeling more connected to faith than I had in decades. 3 weeks later, we moved into a rented house in La Hug, a modest 2-bedroom with a garden where Roslin could grow flowers for the church altar. I started the paperwork to eventually bring her to America, already planning how we'd find a good Catholic church in Portland. Roslin was the perfect Christian wife for exactly 4 months. She cooked traditional Filipino meals while playing worship music, adobo and rice to the sound of How Great Thou Art, pancit accompanied by hymns in Cebuano. She maintained a prayer schedule that structured our entire day and never missed Sunday service or her organ practice. God blessed me with musical gifts, she'd say while practicing scales, so I must keep them sharp for his glory. She woke me every morning at 5:30 for prayer time, and I actually looked forward to those quiet moments together before the world woke up. But small things started bothering me around month 5. She received phone calls during prayer time that she'd take outside, speaking in rapid Cebuano that I couldn't understand. When I asked who was calling, she'd say, just church business, nothing important. Her phone was always face down on the table during meals, but it buzzed constantly with messages. It's probably just the prayer group chat, she'd explain without checking it. When I asked about her family beyond her mother, she'd deflect. With Bible verses about leaving your past behind for new life in Christ. The church is my family now, she'd say, and you are my family, that's all we need. The biggest red flag was her relationship with money. She never asked for money directly, but every conversation somehow led to church needs. The air conditioner in the sanctuary was broken and needed $800 to fix. The organ required new parts that cost John $200. There was always a poor family that needed help with medical bills or school fees. I gave generously because it felt righteous, and because I loved seeing how happy it made her. God will bless you for your generosity, she'd say, kissing my cheek after I handed her another envelope of cash. By month 5, I'd donated $12,000 to various church causes, all cash transactions that Roslin handled personally, since she knew the people who needed help. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March. Roslin was at early mass, something she did twice a week to pray for special intentions. Her phone rang on the kitchen counter while I was making coffee. The caller ID said, "Darling," with a heart emoji. I almost didn't answer. It wasn't my phone and I respected her privacy, but something about that name with the heart emoji made my stomach turn. I picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello, beautiful," a man's voice said in accented English. He sounded Australian or maybe South African. "Are you ready for our weekend in Bohol? I booked the resort like you asked, the one with the private beach." My blood turned cold. I couldn't speak for a moment. "Roslin?" the voice continued. "Baby, are you there?" When I finally managed to say hello, the line went silent, then dead. I sat staring at that phone for 20 minutes, my mind racing through explanations. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe someone had the wrong Roslin. Maybe it was some kind of prank call. But that heart emoji next to darling burned in my mind. When Roslin returned from church, glowing with post-worship peace, I was still holding her phone. "Your phone rang," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone called you beautiful and mentioned a weekend in Bohol." Her face went completely white. For just a second I saw something flicker in her eyes, panic, maybe, or calculation. Then she laughed, but it sounded forced. That's my cousin's husband," she stammered. "Roberto. He's been drinking again, probably confused about who he was calling. He does this sometimes when he's drunk." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But her eyes wouldn't meet mine, and for the first time since we met, her voice shook during evening prayers. That night, she held me tighter than usual, whispering "I love you" over and over like she was trying to convince herself. I started watching Roslin without her knowing. She claimed to go to daily mass, but when I followed her one morning, she walked right past Santo Niño Basilica and took a jeepney to the city center. I hired a tricycle driver named Danny to trail her discreetly, told him I was worried about my wife's safety and needed to make sure she was okay. Danny was understanding, said he'd had foreign friends with similar concerns about Filipino wives. "Just want to make sure she's safe," I explained. "No problem, sir. I follow quiet like ghost." She spent 3 hours at an internet cafe on Colon Street, typing frantically on a computer, occasionally laughing at the screen. Sometimes she'd talk to the screen like she was on a video call, smiling in a way I'd never seen, flirtatious and playful. When she came home, she told me she'd been praying for guidance about our future in America. "Father Martinez and I had a long talk about your visa application," she said. "He thinks we should be patient and trust God's timing." That night, after she fell asleep, I created a fake Facebook account using a random name and stock photo. My hands shook as I searched for Roslin Delgado Cebu. What I found shattered everything I believed about my wife. The first result was a wedding photo from 2019. Roslin in a different wedding dress, cream-colored instead of white, standing next to a tall man with blonde hair. The caption read, "Sacred Heart. Church welcomes the union of Roslin Delgado and Peter Thompson in holy matrimony." The same radiant smile, the same tears of joy, the same bouquet of Sampaguita flowers. The marriage announcement was still public on Sacred Heart Church's Facebook page, with dozens of congratulatory comments from people I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll, but I kept digging. If there was one other wedding, maybe there were more. I searched different combinations of her name, different churches in Cebu. There was more, so much more. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Roslin Delgado had been married 3 times in 3 different Catholic churches within 5 years. 2018, married to James Walker from Canada at Redemptorist Church. The photos showed her in a simple pink dress, younger looking but with the same serene expression. 2019, married to Peter Thompson from Australia at Sacred Heart Church. She wore cream lace and carried white roses. 2022, married to me at Santo Niño Basilica in her grandmother's vintage gown. Each wedding had been elaborate, sacred, and apparently completely fraudulent. The Facebook photos showed the same woman, same devotion, same tears, same beautiful voice, probably singing hymns at 3 separate altars. But it got worse as I kept searching. All 3 men had made substantial donations to various church causes through Roslin's connections. James Walker's Facebook showed him posting about funding a new daycare center for underprivileged children in Cebu, $15,000 for a project that apparently never materialized. Peter Thompson had contributed to purchasing medical equipment for a rural clinic, another $20,000 that seemed to have vanished. I'd been contributing to repairs that were never made, poor families that might not have existed, church improvements that happened only in Roslin's imagination. She wasn't just a bigamist, she was using God's house as a hunting ground for foreign husbands she could financially exploit. The worst part was seeing the pattern in the photos. Each man looked roughly the same age as me, same hopeful expression, same obvious loneliness that had probably made them easy targets. In every wedding photo, Roslin looked genuinely happy, genuinely devout, genuinely in love. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I would have believed every single marriage was real and blessed by God. I printed everything, wedding photos, church announcements, Facebook posts about donations that never reached their intended recipients. I organized it all in a manila folder, like I was preparing an insurance claim, which I guess in a way I was. I waited for Roslin to return from her evening mass, sitting at our dining table with the evidence spread out like cards in a deadly game. She walked in singing "How Great Thou Art" in her beautiful soprano voice, and I felt physically sick watching her perform holiness. "We need to talk," I said, when she saw me sitting there. She looked at the photos scattered across the table and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, then something almost like relief. "Oh," she said softly, sitting down across from me like we were about to discuss dinner plans. "You found them." Her reaction was immediate and terrifying. Instead of denial or shock or tears, she became completely calm, her hands folded neatly, in her lap, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "You don't understand," she said quietly, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "God provides through many vessels. These men needed purpose, and I gave them the chance to serve him through me." I picked up the photo of her wedding to James. "What about this man? What about Peter? What about me?" She smiled, actually smiled. James was selfish with his money. He wanted to keep it all for himself instead of helping God's work. Peter drank too much and couldn't appreciate the spiritual life. "You're different, Howard. You're the first one who truly understood my calling." She spoke like she was discussing missionary work, not fraud and bigamy. When I threatened to call the police, she laughed softly. "Which marriage will you report? I checked before I married you. Legally, none of them exist in Philippine records. We only had church ceremonies, not civil weddings." My blood ran. Cold as I realized, she was right. I'd been so focused on the spiritual aspect that I'd never insisted on legal paperwork. That's when Roslin revealed the scope of her operation, and it was far more sophisticated than I'd imagined. She belonged to a network of women who specifically targeted foreign men through church connections across Cebu. "You think this is about money?" she asked, genuinely confused by my anger. "This is about survival. Do you know how much a church organist makes in Cebu? $50 a month, Howard. $50. But God blessed me with other gifts. The gift of making lonely men feel chosen, feel loved, feel like they have purpose again." She explained how the network operated with casual efficiency, like she was describing a prayer group. Several church employees helped identify wealthy, lonely expats who attended services regularly. The ushers, the gift shop volunteers, even some of the altar servers were part of it. We watch for men who pray alone, who cry during services, who donate generously, who stay after Mass looking lost, men like you. She'd studied each husband's background through social media and casual conversation, learned their favorite hymns, crafted a spiritual persona that matched their deepest spiritual and emotional needs. "I genuinely learned to love each of you," she said earnestly. "That wasn't fake. But I also loved my mother, my siblings, my community. Your money helped feed families, educate children, pay medical bills for people who had nothing. The religious devotion was real. She did believe deeply in God. But she also believed God wanted her to use whatever gifts she had to support herself and her family. I prayed for each of you every single day," she said, reaching across the table like she wanted to hold my hand. "I asked God to make you happy for as long as possible, to let you feel loved and needed and important. Didn't I do that? Weren't you happier with me than you'd been in years?" The terrible thing was, she was absolutely right. I tried to leave that night, but Roslin had anticipated this moment months in advance. My bank accounts, which she'd gained access to through our joint checking account for household expenses, had been systematically drained over the past month. The $45,000 I thought was safely tucked away for emergencies was gone, transferred to accounts I'd never authorized. "I was protecting our future," she said calmly when I confronted her with the empty bank statements on my laptop. "The money is in secure investments that will benefit both of us long term." But when I demanded to see these investments, she became vague. "It's complicated financial planning. You wouldn't understand the details." There were no investments, of course, just a series of cash withdrawals and transfers to accounts with names I didn't recognize, probably relatives or accomplices. In her network. When I threatened to contact my bank in America immediately, she reminded me of something I'd completely forgotten in my panic. I was technically overstaying my tourist visa, something she'd helped me avoid dealing with by promising to handle. The paperwork through her connections at the immigration office. I was going to surprise you with the extended visa, she said. But now, well, overstaying is a serious offense. They could detain you, ban you from returning to the Philippines. Her voice remained gentle and concerned, like she was warning me about a dangerous storm. We're both in complicated situations now, Howard. Maybe it's better if we work together to solve this, instead of making things worse for both of us. I realized with growing horror that I was trapped in a foreign country with no money, questionable legal status, and a wife who'd been planning this manipulation from our first meeting in that church pew. Every act of devotion, every prayer we'd shared, every moment of intimacy had been calculated to bring me to this exact point, helpless and dependent on her mercy. Through Facebook, I managed to track down both James Walker and Peter Thompson. It took several messages before either would respond. Apparently, they'd both been contacted by suspicious accounts before and were wary. James had returned to Canada broke and bitter, refusing to discuss the details beyond a terse warning. Run immediately. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to understand it. Just get out of the Philippines as fast as you can. He wouldn't elaborate, but his Facebook showed he'd gone back to working construction at 65 years old, living in a small apartment instead of the retirement he'd planned. Peter was still in Australia, still trying to recover financially 3 years later, but willing to share his story over a video call. We talked for 3 hours, and it was like hearing my own experience told by someone else's voice. The same courtship through scripture, the same perfect Christian wedding, the same gradual financial bleeding disguised as church charity, the same devastating discovery of the truth. She's brilliant at it, Peter told me, his face gaunt with exhaustion even years later. The religious angle makes you feel guilty for doubting her. When she says she's praying for guidance about money, how can you question that? When she cries, talking about poor families needing help, how can you say no? He'd hired a lawyer in Manila after discovering the truth, spending his last $8,000 trying to get some justice. The lawyer confirmed what Roslin had told me. Without legal marriage certificates, she wasn't technically committing bigamy under Philippine law. She's not legally married to any of you, the lawyer had explained. Just a very successful con artist with a religious theme. The donations you made were voluntary. The emotional manipulation isn't illegal, just cruel. Peter's voice broke when he told me the worst part. She genuinely believes she's doing God's work. That's what makes it so convincing and so sick. She'll look you in the eye and swear she loves you, and she means it in her own twisted way. I spent my last week in the Philippines, staying at a cheap hostel near the port, trying to figure out how to get home with no money and an expired visa. The immigration office wanted $3,000 in fines plus airfare bond before they'd let me leave. I was trapped. Roslin continued attending daily mass like nothing had happened, still playing organ for Sunday services, still collecting donations for various church causes. From my hostel window, I could see Santo Niño Basilica in the distance, and sometimes I'd hear organ music drifting across the city at service times. I watched her from across the street one morning, standing in the shadow of a jeepney stop while she interacted with an elderly American man who was sitting alone after Mass. The same gentle approach I remembered so well. She sat beside him, on the church steps, listened to him talk with perfect attention, nodded sympathetically at whatever troubles he was sharing. The same concerned questions about his spiritual life, the same offer to pray for his loneliness. When she took his hand and bowed her head in prayer, I wanted to run across the street and warn him. But I realized it wouldn't matter. Men like us, divorced, older, desperate for meaning and connection, we see what we want to see in a woman's devotion. Faith makes you vulnerable in ways that logic can't protect against. When you're lonely and searching for God, the line between divine intervention and human manipulation disappears completely. We want so badly to believe that someone pure and holy could love us despite our failures that we ignore every red flag. I watched her walk away with the man's phone number, probably already planning their first prayer session. their first discussion of church needs, their first steps toward another sacred fraud. The cycle was beginning again, blessed by Sunday, morning hymns and evening prayers. My brother finally wired me money for a ticket home after I swallowed my pride and called him from an internet cafe. I had to borrow money from strangers to pay the immigration fines, promising to send payment from America. Promises I'm still trying to keep 2 years later. I left the Philippines with nothing but the clothes in my suitcase and a story no one would believe. During the 16-hour flight to Portland, I kept thinking about Roslin's final words to me. She'd found me at the hostel the night before my departure, appearing at my door like an angel of mercy. "I'll pray that God forgives your anger and helps you understand His plan," she said, and she genuinely meant it. She wasn't gloating or threatening. She was offering spiritual comfort to her victim. That's what haunted me most during that long flight home. Her complete sincerity about her faith, even while systematically destroying the lives of men who trusted that faith. I realized she probably did pray for each husband every day, probably did believe God had brought us into her life for a divine purpose. But that purpose wasn't love or partnership or spiritual growth. It was financial survival disguised as religious devotion, and in her mind, that made it holy work. Back home, I moved into a studio apartment and started working part-time at Home Depot to pay rent. A 58-year-old man in an orange apron helping customers find the right screws, trying to rebuild a life I'd destroyed, chasing a dream of paradise. Friends and neighbors asked about my wife, about my exotic retirement adventure. "How's married life treating you? When is she coming to America?" I told them it didn't work out, that cultural differences were harder than expected. I never mentioned the weddings, the money, or the prayers that cost me everything I had saved for my golden years. 6 months after returning to America, I received a Facebook friend request from Roslin. Her profile showed new photos, a fourth wedding at a different church, this time to a German man named Klaus, who looked about my age, same hopeful smile I'd had in our wedding pictures. She wore a different dress, carried different flowers, but her expression of pure joy and devotion was identical to every other wedding photo I'd seen. She'd sent a message with the friend request. "Howard, I hope you found peace back home. God has blessed me with another chance to serve Him through love. I pray for your happiness every day." I stared at that message for hours, trying to feel angry but mostly just feeling empty. She wasn't evil in any traditional sense. She was a deeply religious woman who'd found a way to use men's spiritual hunger to solve her own economic desperation, and she'd convinced herself it was God's will. The tragedy wasn't her lack of faith, it was how perfectly her genuine faith aligned with our need to believe in something pure and good. She probably did love us in her own compartmentalized way. She probably did pray for our happiness. But she loved her survival more, and she prayed for that harder. I never responded to her message, but I didn't block her either. Sometimes I check her profile to see how Klaus is doing, whether he's started posting about church renovations or community outreach programs that need funding. Last month, he shared a photo of himself handing over a check for $5,000 to help build a new chapel in a remote village. The cycle continues, blessed by Sunday morning hymns and evening prayers, sanctified by tears of joy at altars that have seen this sacred fraud performed again and again. Faith can blind you to everything, but it can also blind the person destroying you. And maybe that's what makes it the perfect weapon for a broken world where everyone's just trying to survive.